Welcome to My Life, Chassidus Applied, episode 496. This program is in loving memory of Miriam Bas Eliyahu, Altez Aleha Shalom, in merit of Baruch Ben Yamin, Ben Menucha Lana Altez, Yukusil Ben Leah Rochel, and Rochel Bas Liba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Todris, and Ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rochel Altez. Well, we are now entered into the month of Iyar, following Nissan, Chedesh Hasheni, with Nissan being the first month when we talk about the lunar cycle. Iyar is the second month. In the Torah, in Torah Shebiksav, in Chumash, we only have the names of the months by their number. The names Oli Imam Mebavel we find later in some places in Tanakh, some of the months. So they're by number, which is also significant, as we shall discuss. So we're now b'Chedesh Hasheni. Chedesh Hasheni from when they left Mitzrayim. So everything begins with the leaving from Mitzrayim, because Mitzrayim is such a fundamental element in Judaism. The Ten Commandments begin. Not that God created heaven and earth, but the taking out of Mitzrayim. And one of the explanations is because that is the ultimate purpose of life. Not just the creation of existence, but that in existence, with all its limitations and parameters, we should find a way to experience divine transcendence. So everything is counted by Hachedesh Hazeh Lachem, which is renewal. As the Medrash says, that when God created the world, Kavalahem, He established for them, that through the month of Tishrei, He established for them years. But and months, that was the regular cycle. But when he was kaveh chedesh ha'geula, when the Eibishter redeemed the Eden, then he was kaveh b'shebacher b'Yaakov Abonov, not just creating the world. That's when he gave them chedesh ha'geula chedesh, which is the lunar month, the new renewal, which is all about creating a new entity, transforming the world and creating something new out of it. Yitzias Mitzrayim. So we're now in the second month of this cycle, and the month of Iyar, and it's the second, as Chassidus explains, the Rebbe many sichas, that the number 2 means now we're ready to bring it into the diversity of existence. The first month is still under the influence of Nigel Alei Melech Malchei Amlochim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God revealed Himself and redeemed them. But now comes the harder work. And that's why it's captured in the concept of counting the Omer, because now we're counting. We're counting down to Matan Torah. We're refining ourselves. So if Nissan is Mamayla Lamata, like Nisim, a miracle, and Geula, so Iyar is now Mamata Lamayla. Our work from the bottom up, when we start counting 1, 2, all the way till we reach Matan Torah. And the third month will be like Tiferes. I'll bring together the Mamayla Lamata of Nissan and the Mamat Lamayla of Iyar into Tiferes Zeh Matan Torah, the month of Sivan. So, when we ask the question, what does this time period and Torah portion teach us today? Let's begin with the time period. This is the time period. We've entered the month of Iyar, a month of our Aveda, of refinement. And it teaches us how we have to take that which the gifts that we're given. In this case, the gifts of Yitzias Mitzrayim, and every year a new higher level of revelation, a higher level of transcendence, and we have to bring it into our being, allowing it to refine ourselves, sanctifying our lives. And as we talk about in this week's chapter, Sfartem Lachem, in Parshas Emor, talks about the mitzvah of Sefirah Emor. Sfartem Lachem. Sfartem means to count, but it also means to tell the story, Sipur. And it also means sapir, to illuminate. Which illuminating is more than just counting and telling the story. Telling the story is also telling an inner narrative. It means that we are using this count to illuminate our lives, to illuminate our emotions, to illuminate the world around us. So it's more than just a count down, but it's actually a transformation and illumination. And with what are we illuminating it? With what we took from Mitzrayim. From Yitzias Mitzrayim, from the second day of Pesach, when we started counting, and we carried it into every day of this month. Every day is mevared, refines another aspect of our personality, our characters, and leading us ultimately to Sinai, to Matan Torah. So that's the first obvious lesson in our lives, what it means in our personal work. But we also have to address the special times we're in today, with the war raging in Gaza. I'm not going to go now into commentary, all these different pauses, ceasefires, no ceasefires. To me, it's very obvious that this is all a manipulation. You want a ceasefire, Hamas surrenders, returns the hostages, revokes all their calls for the destruction of Israel. That's how you got a ceasefire. They declare war and then a ceasefire. What does that mean? A partial ceasefire? What does it mean? Think about it for a moment. So we know that atrocities are October 7th. Shmini Atzeres in our calendar. Shmini Atzeres Simchas Torah in Eretz Yisrael. But what does a ceasefire mean? A ceasefire means when the enemy that attacked stops attacking you, stops declaring war. Even if they don't fight Bepoel, in actuality, they declared war on Israel. I just cannot fathom how that's not being addressed. But we come with the Torah, and we come empowered with the arsenal of the weekly Parshas in the Torah, and with the time period in which we are in. Time is energy. As sefirah Emor tells us, we march forward as we've done for thousands of years in an unbroken chain. And we work on ourselves, and we look to refine ourselves, and we continue to bring godliness into this world. Yes, we have to deal with the enemies, and we have to deal, unfortunately, with wars which have casualties, God forbid. But what we are doing is we're fighting a war of Espartem Lachem, of transforming, not just counting, but the deeper inner narrative. And furthermore, the sapir, the illumination of revealing the divine everywhere, even in the darkest places. That's a dira b'tachtein. And we do so knowing with all the confidence that we have the power from above. We're not coming alone. We have the month of Nissan and all that it's supplied us, all the weapons that it supplied us, spiritual weapons. So when we come into Iyar and we start working from the bottom up, we're coming with a very strong military position, spiritual military position, an arsenal filled with all types of resources and weapons to transform the darkness of the world into light. Then there's the physical manifestation of that, which is the battles that we have to fight. But let's not forget, the main focus is that we're here to change the world and bring Moshiach and bring Geula. Part of that is fighting the darkness, unfortunately. So that's what we learn. How can we gain strength and conviction in the war with Hamas? It's not just to beat the enemy, that they shouldn't hurt us again, because we have a moral conviction, we have a moral vision, we have a vision for the world. And Hamas and its allies, and all their unseemly, you can say, looking for the right word, savage partners, all represent a darkness that we need to break in every possible way, physically, morally, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. Just like the enemies that attacked us in the past. They're not just attacking Jews, they're attacking the values that which we all cherish, the whole human race. So we learn from this time period, we have strengths. And yet we need to do what we have to do with those strengths. What's the best way to address the anti-Israel protests on campuses? Here too, let's take the lessons from this period in time and this week's Parsha V'Sfartim Lachem. Light dispels darkness. Obviously, again, we have to do what we have to do on a practical level. You lock your doors, you defend yourself, you fight an enemy, make sure they don't hurt you. But above all, they cannot define us. We define ourselves. We count these days. We determine what our destiny is. So we wake up in the morning knowing we are marching toward Matan Torah. We know we're marching toward the Geula. Yes, in the way there are impediments, so we have to deal with them, and we have the power to deal with them, militarily and otherwise. But we march forward. That's our mission. And we never forget that. And with that, we hold our heads high, and we're never identified by our enemies. It's a whole different attitude, and they will never know the difference. They just see the resilience and the Am Yisrael Chai, the Nitzchis of Bnei Yaakov Lechalisam. And they marvel and wonder, where is it coming from? It's coming from this attitude. And it's just not just a brilliant, but it's such an empowering approach when you look at the Jewish calendar. You go from Nissan to Iyar, and you understand that you get strength from above, and now we unpack them. And we actualize them through our work, becoming more refined people. That only makes us stronger and gives us the ability to forge ahead. So we see things on the campuses, disturbing things. So again, whatever has to be done legally and technically by all means, but we still stand with our Ge'en Yankiv. It's a different narrative. We're not defined by these narratives. The campuses are not what are going to define us. Obviously we're outraged, and obviously we have to fight it in every possible way, but that's not what defines us. It's like Levi Yitzchak Baditchever said. He was diving by the Amid. He said, the Prussians say that their king is the greatest. The French say that their emperor is the greatest. The Russians say their czar is the greatest. Und he said, Levi Yitzchak ben Sarah Sosha, say, Yiskadal v'yiskadar Shmei Rabbah. Exalt the greatness of the great name of Hashem. That's the world which we live in. And that light is what prevails and ultimately what has endured throughout history when all these other empires, as powerful as they were, all fell to the side. There's no remnant of them. And there won't be any remnant of any others that fight against the divine vision, that divine mission what we are charged with. So Iyar, we're playing it out on a daily basis, every day counting, every day telling the story, every day illuminating. The three meanings in the word sefirah, as explained in the Pardes of the Ramak, and Ayin Beis, in bigger earlier sections, talks about it at length. It's all about bringing godliness into existence. Okay. Let's now move to, more specifically, Parshas Emor. What does this chapter teach us about education, and how can it help us address the crisis in our schools and universities? Excellent question. So we begin right in the beginning. Emer v'amarta lehem. Says Rashi, it's talking about the Kohanim, it's a commandment of the Kohanim, you should tell them, lahazir agdailim alaktanim. That the adults, lahazir, literally means that they should warn, they should protect, or they should instruct the young ones in the ways of a kohen, how a kohen has to behave. The interesting word is lahazir. So lahazir technically means to protect, or to warn even. Hazhara. Here's not a warning of danger per se, it's a warning to be very careful and a special discretion when you are behaving as a kohen. You have a certain holy role to play. But we also know lahazir comes from the word zoyhar, to illuminate. We talked about svartim, illuminate. Hamaskilim yazhiru kezer harakia, like the light, illumination of the heavens. So it's not just that you're guiding them and teaching them and disciplining them. Lahazir is disciplining them, but you're also illuminating them. One word changes the whole course of everything. People discuss what's the best way to educate children. What is the best way to discipline students? So discipline requires guidelines, rules, consequences. But this one word, lahazir, it says the whole message. Yes, discipline them. Teach them what is right and wrong. But do it in a way that illuminates. Do it in a way that is loving. See, even when you need to be sometimes, I don't want to use the word harsh, but firm and very serious to make sure that we don't waver, always lahazir, always illuminating, that the child, the student should go away feeling uplifted, not demoralized. And that's the simple litmus test. You see many schools and homes, they enforce laws. There's a lot of lahazir in a simple interpretation, to discipline. But lahazir from illuminating, that you come to realize that these disciplines actually bring light to your life. So it's an education that's more than just giving people facts and laws and what's right and what's wrong. It's teaching them how to be a light and how to illuminate. Imagine our education systems. We're illuminating people the path of life. What's the right path to walk on? You're walking the dark roads of this world, and we need to have the so-called cosmic headlights. So which brings us back to the campuses and brings us back to our schools and universities. They may be teaching a lot of data. They may be teaching the sciences, the physical, the social, the political sciences. But that's some knowledge. But teaching people how to live, how to be a responsible citizen in this world, to use your unique skills to bring light to everyone around you, that many schools are failing at. So we look at the universities today, and not all of them and not all students, but a predominance of what? Spewing hatred, discrimination, anti-Semitism. Not only is it not lahazid light, it's actually spreading darkness. So everyone, it would do well for everyone to understand and learn this lahazid gdelim alektanim, how to educate, how to illuminate, to be a beacon of light. You see the anger, you see the venom. That's not lahazid. It's the worst type of lahazid in the negative. When you see people who are violent, who are angry, and they're trying to dictate or trying to preach discipline, you don't feel love, you don't feel light, you feel darkness. You don't even know what their intentions are. So we would all do well to study Emor, this week's chapter that teaches us the disciplining with light, with illumination. And you'll see people who have that smile on their face and that sparkle in their eyes, that they go ahead, even when they're teaching something that may be a discipline. You did something wrong, but it has an element of love in it and light. And that changes everything. It's motivating, it's elevating, it's empowering. Whereas the other form, a fear-based education, is scowling, is negative, it brings you down, is demoralizing. So one word in this week's chapter, right in the beginning, teaches us, and that's the best way to discipline students. You'll see students who excel. Yes, have disciplines, and at times those disciplines have to be enforced, but at the end of the day, they don't see the discipline as an end in itself. It's the way to achieve greatness. A pianist also has discipline. So does a tennis player. So does anyone with a skill or talent. There's always guidelines. But the guidelines are about bringing light, being the bearers of light into the world. And that's what Torah and that's what the Jewish people always stood for. Okay, let us now move to, since I wasn't able to finish all the topics we discussed last week, which was around Pesach, post-Pesach thoughts, let's do a section called Post-Pesach Thoughts. Some interesting lessons, not just for Pesach, but all year round. The lessons of Pesach, that we said, the Alter Rebbe did not write Chasal Siddur Pesach, because Pesach continues on. It's a Pul and Imshachas. Perpetual effect on our lives. Many, many lessons that we can take from it. And indeed, Chedesh Hasheni, we always remind you, this is the second month for Tzeis Chomeres Mitzrayim, the second month from when they're leaving Mitzrayim, and then we're continuing to leave. Elamasa B'nai Yisrael, even at the end of the journey, as they reach Yisrael, the 42nd journey, is still part of Elamasa B'nai Yisrael Sheyotzim Mitzrayim, because we're continuously always going out of Mitzrayim v'Gvulim in every possible way, from constraints, from inhibitions, from fears, from insecurities. So let's continue with a few key questions that were asked. First one, how can we distinguish between appropriate extreme hidurim on Pesach and OCD? If you haven't heard of OCD, it's a name, obsessive compulsive disorder, especially with emphasis on obsession. And you can see Pesach especially with all its halachas and care. So this is a very good question. How do you distinguish? To write it out a little more in detail, someone writes like this. I think I witnessed a new level in Pesach obsessive compulsive disorder when my daughter was sitting near the hotel pool, wearing a t-shirt with pictures of matzah on it, and was splashed by someone. And my wife got angry and said she has to change the shirt because it's gebroks. Gebroks is when matzah is mixed with water, and we're very careful with that. But this is not matzah, this is of course a t-shirt with an image of matzah. So I don't know if this guy is writing this as a serious note or metaphorically, but let's continue. I said, how could it be gebroks? It's not a matzah, it's just a picture of a matzah. And my wife was yelling, it's madas ayin. Madas ayin, it doesn't look right. Someone will look from a distance, they may think it's a matzah. And if people see it, they think it's okay to wet matzah. My wife humiliated us with her antics. How can I talk to her in the future to calm her down so she doesn't make a scene in public? I'm laughing. If it's serious, what should I say? Well, first of all, I want to be sensitive because I don't know what your wife is about and what her makeup is and her pathology. I hope she's healthy and that there are other signs of this type of, I guess, not just obsession here, but also distortion. So I wouldn't criticize. I wouldn't try to laugh at her. To find a smart way to deal with it. It reminds me, I remember once hearing Rabbi Zalman Shimon Dvorkin was the Rav in Crown Heights for many years. He was a very smart man. And one day he gets a call or someone comes to see him, a Baal Tshuva. In her naivete and sincerity, she asked him a question. She said that she was holding a fleishik knife and it almost fell into a milchik pot. She wants to know what to do. Again, I didn't hear from him, so maybe this was also meant to drive a point home, but this is the way I heard the answer. He knew if he just dismissed it, she may not fully respect it. She really felt there was a problem here. So he said to her, take the knife, go to the garden, and almost stick it in the ground. And one of the ways to so-called purify, not for all instances, a knife would be to put it in the ground. But here, it almost fell into the pot, so almost stick it in the ground. And she was satisfied. So sometimes you have to learn to diffuse something. They tell the story, there was a bocher, young, in the early years. He was a bocher, he had some challenges, he had some, he was a very beautiful guy, with a lot of neshama. But he was once he heard a mimer of the Rebbe, a mimer Crises, and he became so inspired, literally almost to the point of Kleis HaNefesh. And he told the Rebbe that he feels like he can't be grounded. He feels like he's mamish ready to connect to. He sees Eineg Mulvade everywhere. He sees the divine in everything. It's vibrating and reverberating wherever he goes. So the Rebbe said to him, these type of experiences you have to keep to yourself. Don't share it with others. This is a personal experience. Now, without getting into, did he hold by that level? Did he not hold? But the Rebbe was in a diplomatic and a gentle way, essentially did not want to embarrass him, did not want him to go around talking to people how he sees Elokus. So there's ways to diffuse things in a respectful way. It's not always easy, because it's so easy to mock and laugh. Again, I don't know the details. So that's number one. Obviously, it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, that when you deal with chumras, when you deal with hidurim, it has to be with measure. Even Pesach, where the Shulchan Aruch tells us, other times of the year, we say, Dayech masha osa l'cha Torah. It's enough for what the Torah asked on you, prohibited. You don't have to add more. Pesach, people are machmir for the different reasons. Kol hazoyer b'mashu chametz is the whole year he's protected from avedus, etc. And other reasons. Shmura matzah, special shmira, special lahazir. But lahazir has to always come with the other lahazir, the hazir of illumination. If it becomes an obsession as an end in itself, that's not what the Eibishter wants. The Eibishter gave mitzvahs for us to connect to Hashem. That's the point. A person can start focusing, like we see OCD, on a detail and keep washing their hands because they don't know, maybe they missed something. That's not Torah. That's a person's own things and they have to deal with it. They may need therapy, they may need other things that help them. but always with gentleness and always with respect. Even when you know clearly that that person is something off, but it always has to be that way because every person deserves dignity. So case by case, so how do you distinguish? You distinguish by asking objective parties. Emotionally, we can't know. A person can become obsessed, superstitious, and they convince themselves it's Torah, lav dafka. You ask an objective party, where's an area where I have to be extra careful? Does it fitting to be extra careful? Or here I don't have to be so intensely connected. You talk about Gebroks, it reminds me of the story by the Frierdiker Rebbe's table once. So the guests, one of the guests was not aware of the Gebroks issue, so he took the matzah that was borscht on the table, borscht, and he poured borscht in a cup or a plate, and he stuck his matzah in the borscht. He was going to eat it. The Chassidim right away saw that. Everybody made a whole ruckus. Frierdiker Rebbe sitting at the head of the table looks and sees something's going on there, commotion. He asks Ab Shmuel or someone that was near him, what's going on? So they told him. They told the Frierdiker Rebbe, someone stuck the matzah in borscht. The Frierdiker Rebbe answered, listen to this. Beser areita matzah ve'areita ponim. Better a red matzah than a red face. Then you're embarrassing or humiliating someone. Now this is gebroks. Or is it gebroks with borscht? It doesn't matter. The point being is, that's sensitivity. You have to know how to lahazir is not just yell at someone. It's not just warning. It's not just disciplining. It's illuminating. It's loving. And that's the way to deal with it. Now, obviously, people may have a medical condition, whether there's OCD is an actual diagnosis. Some say yes, some say it's overdone. But regardless, if a person's dealing, and I have dealt with this, you have to find ways. The Rebbe has in his letters ways to diffuse it, to focus on other things, to realize that's not what Hashem wants. You want to bring Hashem into the picture, that's not what he wants. He doesn't want you to repeat the same thing 1,000 times. Which brings us to the next question. What can I do with a family member who's going overboard and with chumras and other obsessions? Which is really a continuation of this question, but someone wrote another question that I combined here. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I think my husband has gone off the deep end. So we're here not discriminatory. Before it was about the wife, now it's about the husband. A few months ago, he decided that every action he does, he will figure out how it's tied to Moshiach and how it will bring Moshiach faster. When he fills the car with gas, he says, may the gas energize this car to drive, to do more mitzvahs, to bring Moshiach faster. Before he eats, he says, may this food give him the energy and inspiration to do more to bring Moshiach. That's all fine, but it gets ridiculous. When the kids stuff the toilet, and while walking toward the bathroom with a plunger, he says, may our plumbing work properly so our bodies can be healthy in order to do more to bring Moshiach. How can I talk to him to find more of a balance and keep talking about Moshiach, but not while doing mundane things such as fixing, unclogging a bathroom? So again, always find respectful ways. Everybody deserves that. Just like we spoke before, how do you make, he's asked, how do I calm her down? She doesn't make a scene in public. So there have to be ways. You have to find the right person. Sometimes as a spouse is not the best person because the spouse will react not kindly to that. Sometimes it could be someone else. To be very careful. If there's a mashpia, would be a good idea. Everyone should have a rav and a mashpia that can help somebody figure out the moderation. Ask. Very often I deal with Chassidish people and I say, what do you think the Rebbe would say? And then they pause. Maybe the Rebbe wouldn't approve. So sometimes invoking the holy name of the Rebbe can work. Sometimes it doesn't. Then you say, so what is it? Are you ready to do something the Rebbe would not tell you to do? Or we tell you not to do it? You know, the Rebbe was as frum as you and more. So you have to find the right method, the right way to speak. In this case, you know, for some things you can overlook. If it's getting out of hand, you have to find someone to speak to, in this case, your husband. The same thing with all situations. It's a combination of sensitivity, common sense, and diffusing. Sometimes ignoring may be the way. Sometimes you have to address it. You have to find the right opening. If you do that and you're conscientious and deliberate about it, in most cases it will work. Okay, moving on. More Pesach discussion topics. But you see, these are universal really for all year round. It goes like this. How can the Medrash say that the Jews were redeemed from Egypt on account of them not changing their names, their language, not speaking slander, and their modesty, when in fact they did not maintain necessarily these virtues? So let's read out the question in detail. It goes like this. Regarding the redemption of the Jewish people from Egypt, it says, and we're talking about a Medrash Vayikra Rabbah, I believe it's Parshas Lamed Beis Hey, and other places, there's different nuschayos. It says that because of three merits, sometimes it doesn't say, the word says it's on account of three things, the Jewish people were redeemed. Jewish name, not slandering one another, and modesty. Seemingly, we find all three of the opposite by the Jewish people at that time. One, you have names like Pinchas, Miriam, Korach, Menashe, Ephraim, even Moshe being Egyptian names, seemingly. Another reason the Jewish people merited redemption was not speaking slander about one another. Doesn't Moshe clearly say that it's a nation that speaks slander about one another? And also the third point, that they were modest. Weren't they stooped in tumah, immorality? Additionally, it seems like there are many nations that adhere to these virtues, maintaining their identities, living moral lives. How do we reconcile the facts about the Jewish people, and what was special specifically about the Jewish nation adhering to these? Okay, so this obviously is a question straight on the Medrash. So there are different ways you can explain it. First of all, the Medrash is not saying exclusively every Yid was perfect in all these areas. Saying in general, there was a trend. In general, the Jewish people maintained the integrity of their connection, as far as names go, as far as language goes, as far as modesty goes. But of course there were exceptions. That's one. Secondly, people we know are complex. You could have one part of you that is very pure, another part that you slip, that you have a setback. The Medrash is trying to tell us is that these are virtues that are Jewish virtues that maintained. So at the end of the day, they were not fully assimilated in Mitzrayim. We're not talking about those that unfortunately ended up remaining there. We're talking about the Yidden were ready to go to the Gula. But it wasn't so simple. In Sfarim, it talks about how Mitzrayim affected them. And it took time to be mitayed, to purify themselves. Part of the Omer is that purification. So I think it's about understanding these are archetypes, these are personalities, virtues. It's like saying, Yidden are Beishanim and Achmonim Geim Lechasadim. They have modesty, they have shame, healthy shame. Achmonim, compassionate, Geim Lechasadim, kind. So you'll say, one second, I know somebody that doesn't have that. So there are exceptions, and it's all about levels. We talked about moderation before. That's the key thing to keep in mind. Okay. And above all, the lesson to us, what we can learn from not changing their name, their clothing, their behavior, that's how we have to live today. That even when we are living among the nations of the world, if you know it's not physical bondage, but there is spiritual, psychological, people are affected by those around us. That's why I have to be told, don't be embarrassed for those that mock. So we need to invoke these deeper strengths that help us not be affected. That's what the Medrash ultimately is teaching us. What can we learn from these qualities that helped redeem the Jews from Egypt? We learn from them what we need to focus on. Redemption comes not from succumbing and surrendering, but from remaining yourself, not letting your identity be shaped by your pain and by your suffering. The Jews did not become Egyptians. They retained their names, their clothing, their attitudes. So when they came out of Mitzrayim, even though they were affected, but they still retained that essence. Being servants of the divine. Okay. Is there a source for the custom of baking a shlis challah for the first Shabbos after Pesach? So we see this custom lately become more and more popular. A shlis challah, either the challah is in the shape of a key, or there's a key actually embedded in the dough. So there are some that dismiss it. As one person writes, some say it's taken from Christianity and from other places. I'll read what somebody wrote. Why do people in the community spread a false teaching based on Avodah Zarah that we are supposed to bake a challah with a key inside? Nowhere in the Torah does Hashem tell us to do this. The only people getting wealthy from shlitzah challah are dentists who get paid to repair damaged teeth when someone accidentally bites a hard key. Why didn't the rabbis put a stop to this Avodah Zarah? So I don't know who's writing this, and the presumption was to just call a minig Yisrael Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah is a very strong statement. I read it the way you said it, but number one is, where do you have the basis of Avodah Zarah? The answer is, the question is on you. And when you indeed look in the sources, you'll find there's many sources of legitimate authorities, halachic authorities. I'll just read a few from a list I saw. The first time B'divrei Iyar. Imre Pinchas. Eiv Yisrael. Says it's a meaning from Yomim Kadmenim. Yismach Yisrael. I mean, I can go on and read a whole bunch of sources. So even if it may not be your custom, and in Chabad we don't have necessarily this custom, the Rebbeim did not institute such a custom. But even if not, there are sources, holy sources, that we rely on. So it's a mitzvah to do, it's a minig. And there are different explanations for it. It's a zgul of parnasa. So let's be careful what we say when we talk about other Yidden. Now there are. I mean, you have the Beis Yosef says, for example, about kaporos, that so many Yidden do kaporos with a chicken. He calls that taka name. That's a very negative name. So that's how the Beis Yosef saw it for them and for his students. But the Ramah and others don't go by that. When it comes to this, I don't know if there's any gadol that came out against it, maybe in our generation, but there are sources. Okay. So a lot of lessons we learn from this. Don't be presumptuous, don't come to conclusions. You don't want to do it, don't do it. But don't suddenly condemn the very concept when you know there are very reliable sources. Okay. Now you could say, well, if there's no source that doesn't say in the Torah, but that's the truth, Omen Hagi Yisrael, or many of them. It may not say anywhere. It's something that the Yidden embraced at some point. Good. A few weeks ago, Al-Havdil, I should say, O.J. Simpson passed away, died. So I got a question then. I want to read it. I just want to get it off my plate, so to speak. So everybody knows O.J. Simpson was a linebacker for the Buffalo Bills. Then later in life, a scandal where he killed his wife and her boyfriend. He claimed he didn't. He was acquitted. But then he was found guilty in a civil court. It was a big thing at the time. The country was divided by race. And his good lawyers found a way. If the glove don't fit, you got to acquit. It came down to a jingle. So there was a lot of latzonis, a lot of scandal around that. It was like, not treated with the proper seriousness. So someone writes, what lessons can we learn from the O.J. Simpson story, where most people think he was really guilty of killing his wife and her friend, but since he was famous and wealthy, he was able to hire the best lawyers who were able to convince a jury to vote innocent. Pharaoh also got away with his crimes for 210 years, and then Hashem brought him to justice. We only had to wait 30 years to see O.J. brought to the heavenly court of justice. Maybe now that we are at the threshold of Gula, the systems are speeding up. As Einstein posits that the sense of time warps the faster you travel, perhaps this is yet another sign of the amazing era we are in as Moshiach is about to come. Okay, well, I could just share a story that happened with me, that maybe that's a lesson. My book, Torah, Meaningful Life, was published in the year 1995. That's the year he was acquitted. So the book came out around a year after Gimel Tammuz, the first Gimel Tammuz. And the publisher had lined up many interviews for me. One of them was a major radio show down south, down in Florida. Covered several states. It was a big thing. It was meant to be Friday morning. I think it was Friday morning. It was Erev Yom Kippur. Let me put it that way. Maybe it wasn't Friday. I don't remember now. And it was all scheduled. It was a big interview. I was ready for it. But that morning, the verdict came out. He was acquitted, O.J. Simpson. That very morning, Erev Yom Kippur, that's for sure. In that year, 1995, which would be Tafshin 95, would be Tafshin Nun Dalet. Yeah. Yeah. Just thinking. 95. September, October 95. Or Nun Hey. Maybe Nun Hey. It was Nun Hey. I'm sorry. Tafshin Nun Hey. So it's still 94. September, October 94 probably. Okay. The producer of the show calls me and says, we have you scheduled and I really love your book. But she says, but that's not the news. Everybody's talking only about the verdict. No one's going to listen. So though it's a good book, I suggest we reschedule. I was told by my advisors, when you get into a radio station, especially a big one, you don't leave. So I quickly said to her instinctively, I said, let's talk about O.J. Simpson. She says, what do you have to say? I said, my book is the solution to all the problems. I had no idea what I was going to say. She says, really? So I have already a guest. I don't need to go book another guest, so we'll do the interview, but we have to talk about this. By all means. A few hours later, I think it was around 11 a.m. when it was scheduled, I get on the call and start talking. Yeah, it says O.J. Simpson's verdict. We have Rabbi Jacobson, author of a new book. What do you have to say about this? So it reminded me, I was told by one of the producers, or one of the publicists actually, that there was a speechwriter for President Kennedy, a speechwriter for President Kennedy, a speechwriter for President Johnson. And he had written a book about cats. Chatulim, cats, the animal, the pet called a cat. Okay. I'm trying to remember his name. He was a speechwriter. It'll come to me. But they didn't want to hear about cats. The television station wanted to hear about the presidents, what it was like working with each one of them. So they asked him, they said, we understand you wrote a book, we'll plug the book at the end of this interview, but tell us what it was like working with JFK. So he said, JFK loved cats. Started talking about cats. What about Johnson? Johnson hated cats. He found his way. So I said to when they asked me about O.J. Simpson, I said, I have to first begin by saying something. Now, right now, as we speak, is Erev Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year we're preparing for, the Jewish people. Many of them don't even know about O.J. Simpson and the verdict. And I told the story with Levi Yitzchak Baditchever, that this one says this king is the greatest, this one says that. Everyone's busy with their thing. Of I, Levi Yitzchak Baditchever, Sosha, Abba. There are standards that are higher. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about O.J. Simpson. I just wanted to put that in place. And then I went on to say, what do you see is happening here? The country is divided by race. The blacks are pro this acquittal. The whites see it's a travesty of justice. I said the solution is in Torah Meaningful Life. And I opened the chapter. I think it's the chapter on government or responsibility or unity. I don't remember which chapter. Where the Rebbe Mayor Dinkins comes to see the Rebbe. This is after the riots in 1991, in the summer of 91. And he says to the Rebbe, he wants a blessing for the two peoples, meaning the blacks and the Jews. And the Rebbe said, not two peoples, it's one people under one administration, under one God. I said, we have to realize we're all created in the divine image. We're all part of one human race. When we understand that divine image, and that's the theme of Torah Meaningful Life, these racial divides will go away. And we went on. I said, you can legislate and you can try to eliminate discrimination. It only comes down to when you see godliness in each person. And actually the interviewer really loved it because that was an angle no one was speaking about. Everyone was speaking, was he guilty, was he not guilty, did the glove fit, did the not glove fit, justice, juries, manipulation, shallowness. People don't know how to look at something with discretion. It was really very powerful. So, and that's a lesson that, since we're talking about O.J. Simpson, I wanted to share. Okay. So next question is, what is the difference between Zion and Israel? Why are people who support Israel called Zionists? The country is called Israel, Eretz Yisrael, so its citizens and supporters should be called Israelites or Israelists. Or maybe Judeans after one of its territories. But what exactly is Zion? What does it mean? Does the Torah ever use the name Zion to refer to Israel? So first of all, the English names are not the reliable ones. We have to look at the Hebrew names. You have Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael. You have it's called before Eretz Canaan. And absolutely, the Torah in a number of places talks about Tzion b'mishpet tipada v'shaveh b'tzedakah. B'tzion, the word Tzion. And a number of places. Ki mitzion seitzei Torah v'dvar Hashem Yerushalayim. So Tzion can refer to, we know there's a Mount Zion, the Mount Har Tzion in Eretz Yisrael. Tzion can refer to a particular place, but it also has a general name. Tzion means a marker. A Tzion. B'shuv Hashem l'tzpetzion. Hashem will return to Tzion. So in Hebrew, every word has meaning. Yisrael comes from the word the Balach of Esav that gave Yaakov the name. Ki sarisei malikim v'anoshim v'tuchel. You wrestled with men and with angels, with God, with God's angels, with God's representatives, and you prevailed. So that's one thing. Yaakov has also a name, also has a meaning. Tzion represents the bittul Chassidus brings. From the Yerushalmi, that everywhere in the Yerushalmi it's called Tzion. Tzion represents bittul, like a simon. It's not me, I'm a sign for something beyond me. Asket al Tzion, the Rebbe used. On a Tzion, a marker, which is a place where a tzaddik rests, is a Tzion. Because it's not an entity of its own, it's a Tzion, it's a marker for something greater. It's a sign that godliness is in this place. So that's the emphasis of Tzion. Unfortunately, it was distorted when secular Zionism was born. It's used as a name. Because if everybody was living up to the true meaning of Tzion, we'd have complete bittul, the complete selflessness of just expressing the divine in this world. That's briefly the answer to that. Another question came in. It's a topic I've spoken about in the past. Why did the Rebbe not go to Israel? Did the Rebbe once say that he didn't visit Israel because it's a question of halacha? If someone goes to visit Israel, they may not be allowed to leave. Then why do many people from America go on vacation to Israel if it's a question of halacha? So we actually have several different answers the Rebbe has given. I can only repeat what the Rebbe said. I can't speak about the things, the deeper reasons. But there are different reasons that we've heard. There is this reason, it's true. Eretz Yisrael is not just a place for sightseeing. Eretz Yisrael is a higher kedusha. You don't just go to Eretz Yisrael and leave. It's not respectful. So you have to have a good, strong reason. But then you can say, why didn't the Rebbe move to Israel and just stay there till Moshiach would come? So another reason we hear the Rebbe said, the Eibishter führt die Welt, Hashem etzadik over Keinanu. The Eibishter led the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe to the shores in America. That means that's where their shlichus is. Just like they were born in the former Soviet Union or Russia, that's where Hashem wanted them to be born. And they follow what the Eibishter wants. You don't just do. In other words, it's not about doing what I want. It's doing what my shlichus is. Which indeed the Rebbe told people who wanted to move to Eretz Yisrael, by all means, but on condition that your job that you have right now, where you are, will be filled. Meaning, if you're needed to be a teacher in a school, or a head of a mossad, of an organization, or another way people are dependent on you, it's not so simple. That is your shlichus. Another explanation that some say, I think it may be also hinted to in the Rebbe, a captain doesn't leave a ship. There are so many Yidden in America and the world, the diaspora outside of Eretz Yisrael, that need to be inspired. Inspired to be prepared to go to Eretz Yisrael with Moshiach. And many have gone before. So Rebbe, that's his job. It's not about him. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't end up in Eretz Yisrael either. He stays with his people. Because it's not about him. It's about his mission. And in case anyone wonders, though the Rebbe didn't go to Eretz Yisrael, but some say he was more in Eretz Yisrael than anyone that's even in Eretz Yisrael. His mind was there. Besides the fact that he davens toward Eretz Yisrael 3 times a day. But the Rebbe, you could see it in his talks, in his passion. And how many people did he send to Eretz Yisrael? Did he inspire to go there? His entire community. So it's not something about not going to Eretz Yisrael. And then there's, of course, the reason That doesn't mean you can't go, because you find Daily Yisrael that did make their way. The Ramban, Shalom, at the end of their lives, they made their way to Eretz Yisrael. Why didn't they go earlier? Because there's certain, again, like I said, Ashgacha, this is where you are. If the Eibishter wants you to go, he'll make sure you go. Then there, I've heard, this is not from the Rebbe, that some say practically, the Rebbe's Ashpah would have been, was much greater from where he was. I once heard in the name of the Baba Sali, so I was saying it, L'chvavusa de Milsa, he said, that it says, B'derech Klal, Eretz Yisrael, the time of the Beis HaMikdash is like the light of the sun. But once the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Eretz Yisrael became like the light of the moon. Who's the light of the sun? Moshe Rabbeinu, Pnei Chama. Moshe is like Pnei Chama. So the Moshe of every generation is like the sun. So though Eretz Yisrael is tremendous Kedusha, but in Golus, it's more like the Golus Eretz Yisrael is B'churbana. So destroyed Eretz Yisrael, even when it's rebuilt technically, but spiritually speaking. So Baba Sali said, the sun doesn't want to embarrass the moon. Being the Rebbe, being the Moshe of the generation. That was his word. Okay, there may be more. If anybody has anything to add, please share it with me, and I'll share it with the audience. Let's conclude, being that we have some time here, but it's, I think, a good, appropriate, being that we're coming from Chavches Nissan, 33 years from the Rebbe said that classic Sikha. Tut also said, can do everything you can. So, as you know, over the months, from time to time, I go back to certain recurrent themes. Moshiach is one of them. And questions keep coming in. So I want to take a bunch of questions I haven't addressed yet, or have addressed, but maybe with another angle, and talk about Moshiach. Coming from Mitzrayim, from Kemei Tzeis Eretz Mitzrayim, from Mitzrayim Mitzrayim, very appropriate. Arenu Neflois. I will show you wonders in the time of Moshiach. So a few questions that came in, and I've consolidated again. So let's begin maybe with a basic question. What exactly is Moshiach? And let's put it this way. What is Moshiach and what is Moshiach and Geula? Is there a difference between the two? So in general, euphemistic terms meaning as in human language, Moshiach Geula is pretty synonymous. But remember, Moshiach refers to the person, the Goyal. Like Moshe that led the Idn out of Mitzrayim, Goyal Achrin will be Moshiach from the Beis David that will lead the Idn out of this Golus. Geula is the state, is the Chefza, so to speak, the very redemption from the exile, like Geulas Mitzrayim. So Moshe would be like the equivalent of the Goyal, B'shlichus of the Eibishter, and Geulas Mitzrayim. Same thing with Geula and Mashiach. And the Rambam paskins that, yes, Mashiach will be led through a human being up from Beis David, a person of flesh and blood, just like Moshe. Hu Goyal Rishon, Hu Goyal Ach. Other places discussed, what does that mean exactly spiritually? Because remember, Moshe was from Shevet Levi, Mashiach's from Beis David, which is Yehuda, Shevet Yehuda. But that's for another time. So, what exactly is Geula? The Geula means redeem. What are you redeeming? You're redeeming a world that is concealed, that conceals his purpose, that conceals the divine purpose within it. The Eibishter made it tzimtzum, and it's concealed. Geula is when it will be revealed. The nigla kved Hashem v'ro kol basar yachdav. And ayin ba'ayin yiro, and the different psukim as the Alter Rebbe brings in chapter 36 in Tanya. And that is why it's through Masenu v'avedesenu, as he explains in chapter 37. Every time we do a mitzvah, every time we learn Torah, we're revealing a little piece of godliness in this world. Accumulatively, these are all building blocks that lead to Gilui Ein Sof Be'elam Hazeh Agashmi, as the Alter Rebbe says right at the beginning of chapter 37. That is the chefz of Geula. You want the definition? Gilui Ein Sof Be'elam Hazeh Agashmi. In the language of the Rambam, Lo yeh esek kol ha'elam el ladasas Hashem b'lvad. That the business of the world will be nothing but knowing God. Molor is deis Hashem kamayim le'yom achasim. So the material world will not be an end in itself. It'll be a channel, a vehicle for divine expression. Everything God created is l'chveidei, to honor. So everything in this world, every fiber of existence will declare the godliness, the godly honor, and the godly glory. That's what Losad Lavi is. To the point, Even Mekir Tizak, that the very stones of the wall will cry out with godliness. The world will be saturated. Like today, we physically feel when we're hungry or thirsty, then we'll physically feel, naturally feel, the need for godliness and what God wants. Okay. So in a way, you can say that the ultimate is making the world fulfill its purpose, and that's why the world will then be the most beautiful place, like the Rambam says, Le'kina v'le sachrus, le'rov v'le melchama. There'll be no hunger, no war, no avarice, no unhealthy jealousy. Or in the words of the Maimer Basa Legani from the Medrash Shir Hashirim Rabbah, Basa Legani Achesi Kala, Legani Leksiv Kan El Legnuni Leksiv El Legani, Legnuni. Doesn't say Legan, but Legani, Gnuni, my bridal chamber. The Ika Shechina was here in the beginning of creation. It then got concealed through human beings' sins, transgressions that created a dissonance and a concealment. And Geula is returning, that will be Basa Legani, I shall return to my world and to my garden. Adira betachtenim, Adira leis barach betachtenim. A home, a comfortable home for the divine in this material world, in the lowest of all worlds. Okay, so that's that question. So someone asks, what is the purpose of making the world a more beautiful place? Now let me read this. To Rabbi Simon Jacobson, I thoroughly enjoyed your lecture on the need to focus on the why of life as opposed to the what. The most powerful concept I've ever heard. Why are we here? So it's just not living the what, the why. If I understand correctly, the purpose of our existence, or each individual, is to actualize the potential that God has given us to make this world a more beautiful place through the tools that He provided us with. My questions are as follows. What is the purpose of making the world a more beautiful place? Who does that benefit, and for what reason are we the ones to fulfill this purpose? As far as my understanding, the world itself does not benefit from our efforts in beautifying it. I would also argue that being that Hashem is infinitely perfect, He cannot benefit from us either. In addition, one might feel that the pain and struggle of life is not worth the beautification if it does not have a greater purpose benefit for us. I understand that this may seem selfish. However, we are created, put on this earth, and live a rather roller coaster life. I would hope for a greater purpose than to benefit a finite and partially inanimate world. I would hope that it benefits me as well, as much as that sounds egotistical. However, after putting in the hard work and going through so much pain, I think it is fair to feel that it should be worthwhile. It is difficult to think that my pain is the benefit of someone else. Though you're mentioned in the lecture regarding comments, questions, and unclogging blockages, I felt it would be appropriate to direct my questions to you. I appreciate your efforts in being available to and helping the Jewish community. I look forward to your response and the potential to gain some clarity on this topic. Sincerely. Well, on all levels, it's not just for an individual, it's for God Himself. God desired to have a home in this world. Why? We don't know why, because there's no questions. But we know what He wants. So that's number one, the fulfillment of what God wants. That's the purpose. That's the very purpose of existence. So beautifying the world, yes, has the beautiful part to it, but it's also actualizing God's will. It's also actualizing our potential. You could say, what's the benefit of that? I mean, look at every person. Who wants to remain just in a potential state? You want to be able to actualize your potential, to make your mark in this world, to live the best possible life by living up to why you're here. You mentioned the why is so important. Moshiach is the answer to the why. That's when we will fulfilling our why. Not just what we do. Not just a life that's driven where the ship tells the captain where to go. When someone asks you, what do? You give them your business card. That's what you do. What you do shouldn't define who you are. Who you are should define what you do. That's Moshiach. And the who you are is you, the world, every aspect of the world. This table, this chair I mentioned before, everything God created was l'chveidei. That's what you want, not a world for your purposes, for the divine higher purpose. Like a machine that's fulfilling the reason it was built by its engineer. So I'm not sure if that's what's missing, but that is the key thing, and that is definitely worthwhile. You have children. Your children have potential. What greater satisfaction, what greater fulfillment is there is actualizing that potential. Okay. How many stages will there be after Mashiach comes? So there are many Maimar Chazal on this. I would refer you to an Igres Kodesh of the Rebbe, which was initially printed in a book called Kavitz, in a journal called Kavitz Lubavitch, which was then collected and printed in a booklet called Shuvas Biyurim, where the Rebbe answered questions. And one of them is to explain Tchias HaMesim. And there the Rebbe went through the stages, all the different Chazal. Generally speaking, we talk about two stages. The first stage, which is more of a natural stage, another stage where there'll be changes, which answers a lot of questions why in some Chazal it says there won't be miracles, and other places says there will be miracles. The Alter Rebbe in Ageres HaKedesh Simon Chavav explains, mitzvahs b'telis la'asalavi, there will no longer be mitzvahs, is in the second tkufa. It's called the second stage. But in these stages itself, you have different opinions. When exactly will be Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection, after 40 years, for some earlier. But generally it's stages like anything in life. When you perfect something, when you grow something, there are stages. So in general, we talk about three general stages. Mashiach Mashiach. In Mashiach, there's two levels, but before that, Elam Haza, as the Rebbe puts it in that essay, printed now in volume 2 in Igris, in the Rebbe's letters. First is Hayem La Seisam, the Aveda of the Melchama between good and evil, between the animal soul and the divine soul. Then there's the end of the Melchama, it's called Yemesa Mashiach, where there's no longer a war, but there's still good and evil in the world. And then there's the level of Ruach Hatuma Avra Min Haaretz, where God will remove the toxins of this world. And He'll shech the Yetzer Hara, no longer. Eliminate anything negative. The last two is what I'm talking about, the two tkufas. That's generally speaking. How will we know what stage we're in? Well, based on the different the criteria that Chazal say, you can figure it out from there. So to read it inside here, how do we know what stage we're in and what our goal is that in that stage in order to elevate to the next stage? So we're told. Early on, we know there'll be a Beis HaMikdash, there'll be Kibbutz Goliath, and there won't be a need for miracles, which leads us to the next question. Will there be miracles when Mashiach comes? Dear Rabbi Jacobson, it's nice that on your Sunday podcast you have been discussing practical things that will happen when Mashiach comes. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any miracles suspending the laws of nature will happen when Mashiach comes. People will still get sick and die. We will still have to go to work. There will still be accidents. The only difference will be that there will be a greater awareness of godliness in the world. So if an illness happens to someone, they will be aware that is God's will. But my question is concerning Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead. Does it mean all those who died will be resurrected and be alive again in a physical body, as they once were, which would obviously need a miracle suspending the laws of nature? Or do we understand that, as we explained, Yaakov Avinu lo mes, that Yaakov did not die? Which means, even though Yaakov is no longer alive in a physical body, his teachings and positive influences on the world live on. Mazari b'chaim afu b'chaim. As his children are alive, so too is he alive. So it's not actual Tchias HaMesim he's trying to say, it's more figurative. And according to that understanding, the future Tchias HaMesim could mean that although those who died are not alive again in a physical body, but all the things they did when they were once alive and the positive influence it had on the world will be understood by everyone, and therefore, albeit in an abstract way, they're still alive. Well, the answer is no, Tchias HaMesim is kipshute, literally. And how do you explain the fact that you see there won't be, like the Rambam writes in the end of Hilchos Melachim, you don't need a change in nature? So here we have the two tkufas, and go back to Siman Ageres HaKedesh 26, Epistle 26, Siman Chavov, where he talks about it. So there is a stage that you describe, and there's a stage, there will be changes. To the point that it even says, Chad Charuv, there'll be such changes, the whole world will become a Shamayim Chadoshim, V'eretz Chadosh, a new reality altogether. But these are all different stages. So will the resurrection be literal, the physical rising of all those that died? The answer is absolutely. Neshamas begufim, as they did mitzvahs, neshamas begufim kipshutei. So that will be returned. Even the Rambam, who holds it's not a permanent state, he still believes in tchis hames and kipshutei, not the metaphorical. And now we'll conclude with one final question. How should we be integrating Moshiach in our daily lives? How can we integrate the new paradigm of our current era of transitioning into Mashiach's time immediately as we wake up and say Moda Ani, so that we can prioritize it and begin our day not only with thinking about Mashiach, but with thinking that today is the day he will come? The answer is exactly that. As much as possible, we have to constantly put the Aleph. Look for Hashem in everything, in divine providence, in your work, in your home, in your interactions, even in your entertainment. Everything has the divine within it. B'chol derechecha de'eyu is a taste of Malor's Deis Hashem, Kamayim Le'yam Mechasim. A taste of Lo Yiyesa Kol Elam El L'Dases Hashem Bovad. B'chol derechecha de'eyu. In all your ways, you should know Him. Can we be perfect? As much as possible. That's the simplest way. You say Moedani in the morning, not just thank you for giving me back my soul, but recognizing the divine soul within you. The Aleph that we place into Geula, that turns it into Geula. The Aleph of Aluf Ishaleilam, the master of the universe. The Aleph of Achdus, Hashem Echad. Revealing it wherever we can. Because that's the essence of Geula. Should we all quit our jobs so we can have time to dedicate 24 hours a day to prepare for and bring Mashiach? To learn about Mashiach, prepare for Mashiach, and spread the message to others about Mashiach in order to hasten Mashiach's coming? We shouldn't worry about not having parnasa, because if Mashiach comes right away, before we deplete our savings, then we can go to Israel and rent food, and rent and food will be free. No, that's not the way. We have to go by what we see right now. The Frierdiker Rebbe said, Al pi Hashem yachnu, al pi Hashem yisu. If Hashem says right now you're here, you have to build, not just rent, build. We're waiting every second Mashiach comes, so why are we building homes? Why not just rent short term? Because that's the Nesa Hafrim, the opposites. Right now, like when the Yidden were traveling in the wilderness, if Hashem told them to stop, command the kfir lahudami. Since Hashem said so, that becomes a permanent, even though it's just a short period of time. And there was one place they stayed for many years, over 20 years. Because everything has the kfiyas, even if it's for a second, but that's what God wants. And then, a second later, and we hope and we pray Mashiach should come. Seems like opposites, so the Rebbe said, Id is nimnam nimnois, we could do opposites. So we should not quit our jobs. In your job, infuse your job with Gettlichkeit, with godliness. Bring Mashiach to the people around you. Live it. Live it in your home should look like a Mashiach home. Your business should look like a Mashiach home. Ethically, al pi Torah, al pi halacha, and beyond. Shiurim, Torah Vedic Milas Chasad. I think is a good way to conclude this My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 496. Everyone have a really powerful Chodesh Iyar. May the Eden and Eretz Yisrael be protected. Layonim v'leishan Hashem Yisrael, especially Eretz Asher Eni Hashem Elekecha Ba Mereishis Hashana V'ad Achri Shana. And all the hostages should be released once and for all, completely unscathed. And Shalom HaYisrael permanently and marching into the Gula Amitis V'Ashlema. This has been My Life Chassidus Applied, chassidusapplied.com, where you can submit all your questions. Call Tuv and be well.
This program is brought to you by My Life, Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapplied.com/donate.